The drop pod screamed through Hell's Reach Miner's ash-choked sky like a meteor wrapped in fury. It carved a burning scar across the horizon, trailing smoke spirals that dissolved into the perpetual gray blanketing this dying world. The planet below was a wound upon the galaxy's flesh, its surface torn open by trenches stretching thousands of kilometers, zigzagging networks of mud, razor wire, and corpses that had become geography itself. The impact shook the earth for half a kilometer. Guardsmen in forward trenches threw themselves flat as dirt and shrapnel geysered skyward. The pod had struck in no man's land, embedding itself between Imperial lines and the green tide that had been clawing westward for 3 months. Steam hissed from ruptured seals. Warning runes flickered across the battered hull, casting red light across mud that hadn't been dry in years. The design was wrong, not Imperial, not entirely. Its construction suggested technologies that didn't align with the Mechanicus's sacred templates, yet it resembled drop pod architecture enough to be recognized for what it was. A coffin designed to deliver soldiers into hell. The hatch blew outward with pneumatic force. A figure emerged into smoke and firelight, rising with the slow deliberation of someone who'd done this too many times before. Tall, broad-shouldered, encased in armor both familiar and utterly alien. The design spoke of durability over ceremony, function over faith. No purity seals hung from the plates. No litanies were inscribed across the pauldrons. The armor was scarred, dented, patched with field repairs suggesting years of continuous use, colored in faded blues and grays, camouflage patterns that meant nothing on this world of mud and ash. Marcus Fenix had been fighting wars for most of his adult life. He'd seen cities fall, friends die, entire worlds consumed by enemies that shouldn't exist. The Locust Horde had taught him that humanity's survival was never guaranteed, that every victory was temporary, that peace was just intermission before the next war. He'd lost count of battles, lost count of friends buried under rubble or torn apart by creatures that crawled from the depths. He'd learned to compartmentalize grief, to keep moving forward even when forward meant nothing more than surviving another hour. But this wasn't Sarah. The sky was wrong. The gravity felt different, heavier, as though the planet itself resented his presence. The air tasted of chemicals and corruption his armor's filters struggled to process. In the distance, beyond curtains of smoke and falling ash, something vast and bestial roared, a sound that vibrated through the ground into his bones. He checked his weapon by instinct. The Mark II Lancer assault rifle, still maglocked to his back, its weight reassuring even after violent descent. He pulled it free, the chainsaw bayonet gleaming dully in the half-light. The weapon had killed thousands. Grubs, drones, boomers, things with names he'd tried to forget. It had never failed him. The magazine was full, the chamber clear, the blade's teeth sharp enough to bite through chitin and bone. He chambered around with practiced efficiency, the sound lost beneath distant artillery thunder. Something moved in the smoke ahead. Marcus dropped to a crouch, weapon raised, targeting reticle tracking movement through haze. His HUD flickered, struggling to adapt to atmospheric conditions it had never been designed to interpret. Thermal imaging painted ghosts across his vision. Motion sensors pinged returns that made no sense. Biological signatures too massive to be human, too numerous to be anything but an army. The shapes resolved into figures shambling forward through mud with weapons held at awkward angles. They wore uniforms that looked centuries out of date, greatcoats and steel helmets, gas masks and armor plates, bolted over flak vests. They moved with the exhausted determination of men who'd been fighting too long, their formation loose but functional. One raised a hand, shouting something in a language Marcus didn't recognize. The words were harsh, guttural, inflected with sounds designed to carry over battle's roar. The soldier's mask reflected firelight, twin lenses staring like mechanical insect eyes. Others joined him, spreading into a half circle, weapons not quite aimed but ready. They were cautious, smart. They'd seen too many things crawl from drop pods that weren't friendly. Marcus lowered his rifle slightly, keeping it ready but not threatening. The lead soldier stepped closer, mud sucking at his boots. Shorter than Marcus, by a head, his uniform bearing insignia that meant nothing but suggested rank. A crimson sash hung from his shoulder. On his belt hung an oversized pistol. When he spoke again, his voice was muffled by the mask, but the tone was clear. A question, a demand for identification. Marcus keyed his external speakers, his voice emerging rough and flat through armor's vox casters. "Sergeant Marcus Fenix!" Coalition of Ordered Government's Armed Forces. Who the hell are you? The masked soldier cocked his head, turned to a companion and spoke rapidly. The second soldier pulled out a device, part voxcaster, part religious iconography, speaking into it in clipped tones. The response came as static and broken Gothic, a language Marcus's translator suite struggled to parse before offering fragmented approximations. Asterisk, Astra Militarum. Imperial Guard. Hell's Reach Minor. Orc Incursion. Asterisk. None of those words meant anything to Marcus, but the tone conveyed enough. He was in the middle of someone else's war. Before he could respond, the air itself shuddered. A sound rose from beyond the smokeless voice, more force of nature, a bellowing cacophony that drove itself into the skull like nails. The guardsmen snapped to attention, weapons rising as one, exhaustion falling away in the face of pure survival instinct. The lead soldier shouted orders, and men began falling back toward their trenches with practiced speed. Marcus saw it a heartbeat later. The smoke parted like a curtain torn by a giant's hand. Through the gap charged something that defied rational description. Massive, easily 3 meters tall. Its body was a slab of muscle and scar tissue barely contained by crude armor plates bolted directly into green flesh. Its jaw jutted forward, lined with tusks the size of combat knives. In its hands, it carried a weapon that looked like 3 machine guns welded together with a fuel tank attached. Zero regard for safety or sanity. The thing's eyes burned with manic glee, and as it charged, it opened its mouth and screamed, "Asterisk, wah! Asterisk!" Behind it, the smoke disgorged dozens more. Orks, that was the word Marcus's translator offered, though it seemed inadequate. They were a green tide of muscle and violence, each one a walking engine of destruction wrapped in scrap metal and fury. They charged with no formation, no tactics beyond forward momentum and overwhelming aggression. Some fired weapons as they ran, bullets spraying in wild arcs that cut down their own as often as they threatened the enemy. Others simply bellowed and waved massive blades, eager to close distance and tear into flesh with bare hands. The guardsmen opened fire. Lost fire lit up the smoke, crimson beams lancing through haze to punch smoking holes through green flesh. The orcs staggered but didn't fall. Some kept running, even with fist-sized wounds burned clean through torsos. Others stumbled, recovered, and charged again with greater fury. The guardsmen's discipline held, volleys coordinated, but Marcus could see immediately they were outmatched. The enemy had numbers, mass, and complete disregard for casualties that turned them into a living avalanche. Marcus made his decision in the space between heartbeats. He opened fire. The lancer roared, muzzle flash strobing through smoke as armor-piercing rounds tore into the orc charge. Marcus walked his fire across the front line, each burst controlled and precise. Headshots where possible. Center mass when not. The weapon's kick was familiar, comforting. He compensated automatically as he burned through half a magazine in seconds. Orcs fell, bodies tumbling into mud, tripping those behind them. It created momentary hesitation in the charge, giving the guardsmen precious seconds to adjust their line. The lead guardsman shouted something that might have been gratitude or tactical coordination. Marcus didn't wait for clarification. He surged forward, closing distance to the orc line with the kind of aggressive countercharge that had kept him alive through a dozen hopeless battles. His armor servos enhanced his strength, letting him move faster than his bulk suggested. He slammed into the nearest orc at full speed, driving his shoulder into the creature's midsection with enough force to crack armor and bone. The impact sent both sprawling, mud flying. Marcus twisted as they fell, bringing the lancer's chainsaw bayonet around in a horizontal arc. The blade bit deep. Teeth screamed through green flesh, spraying blood in a crimson arc that painted Marcus's visor. The orc howled, thrashing, one massive hand closing around Marcus's arm with crushing force. Warnings flashed across his HUD as pressure mounted on armor plating. Marcus reversed his grip, drove the lancer's butt into the orc's face, felt bone crunch, then ripped the chainsaw blade sideways through the creature's neck. The orc's roar cut off mid-bellow, dissolving into wet gurgle. Its grip went slack. Marcus rolled to his feet as 3 more charged him. He fired from the hip, walking backward as the lancer chewed through the magazine. The weapon never jammed, never failed the one constant in a universe that had become utterly wrong. Orcs fell, but more poured forward. Marcus realized with grim certainty this wasn't a battle to be won, only survived. only delayed. A hand grabbed Marcus's shoulder, spinning him around. The lead guardsman was shouting, his mask inches from Marcus's visor, barely audible over combat's roar. He pointed back toward Imperial lines, toward trenches rapidly filling with soldiers firing over sandbag parapets and continuous volleys. The message was clear. Fall back or die here. Marcus fired one last burst into advancing Orks, turned, and ran. The guardsmen retreated with practiced efficiency, leapfrogging back in squads that covered each other's withdrawal. They moved through obstacles placed specifically to slow pursuit, barbed wire, tank traps, ditches filled with stakes. The Orks followed, their charge slowing as terrain turned against them but never stopping. They climbed over their own dead, used corpses as shields, bellowed their war cry loud enough to shake earth. Marcus vaulted a trench wall and dropped into the Imperial line. The space was narrow, barely wide enough for two men side by side, its walls shored up with corrugated metal and prayers etched into every surface. Guardsmen packed the firing steps, lost guns resting on sandbag parapets as they poured fire into the oncoming horde. Officers shouted orders, voices hoarse from hours of continuous combat. Medical personnel dragged wounded back from the front line, working with brutal efficiency to stabilize injuries that would be fatal anywhere else. The air stank of ozone, blood, and something else, something Marcus's filters identified as promethium exhaust. An explosion rocked the trench as an Ork grenade detonated nearby, dirt raining down. Marcus steadied himself against the trench wall, checking his weapon. The magazine indicator showed 60% remaining, enough for another sustained firefight, but not extended engagement. He didn't know where he could resupply, didn't know if his ammunition was even compatible with whatever these soldiers used. The weight of his situation settled like physical burden. He was alone, stranded on a world he didn't recognize, fighting in a war he didn't understand for a cause that wasn't his own. It wasn't the first time. The lead guardsman appeared beside him, pulling off his gas mask to reveal a face too young and too old simultaneously. The man's eyes were sunken, ringed with exhaustion, but sharp with awareness that only came from prolonged combat. He spoke in clipped Imperial Gothic, his accent thick but understandable now that Marcus's translator suite had more context. "You fight well, stranger, but you fight for the Emperor now. Whether you know it or not, Commissar Colt will want to see you. Don't make him wait." Marcus didn't know who the Emperor was or who Commissar Colt was, but he knew war when he saw it, and this war had only just begun. The command bunker was dug 15 meters below surface, its reinforced ceiling designed to withstand orbital bombardment or at least delay the inevitable. Walls were lined with parchment maps, showing trench networks stretching across the continent, each position marked with pins indicating strength, casualties, and estimated time until collapse. The air smelled of recaf, a bitter stimulant officers consumed in quantities suggesting addiction or desperation. Commissar Drevin Colt stood before the map table, hands clasped behind his back, posture radiating authority that didn't need announcement. Tall, lean, severe, his uniform immaculate despite conditions. The greatcoat he wore was black as void, its hem brushing the ferrocrete floor. On his chest hung medals and commendations, each representing a battle where discipline had turned potential rout into victory. At his hip hung a bolt pistol, its grip worn smooth from use, and a power sword whose activation stud showed telltale scuffing of frequent deployment. His eyes were the color of storm clouds. They missed nothing. Marcus stood at attention because the guardsman flanking him had made clear anything else would be unwise. His armor was still caked with mud and orc blood, Lancer maglock to his back. He'd refused to surrender his weapon, and the fact he still carried it suggested the Commissar had allowed this breach of protocol for now. Colt studied Marcus with intensity, usually reserved for assessing enemy fortifications. "You are not guard," Colt said finally, his voice a low baritone carrying absolute certainty. "Your armor is not a standard pattern. Your weapon is not of Mechanicus origin. Your insignia mean nothing to Imperial records. Yet you fight like a soldier who has seen the worst humanity can offer, and survived." Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "I fight because that's what I do. I don't know how I got here. I don't know where times here times is, but I've been in enough wars to recognize one when I see it." Colt's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, perhaps respect. Hell's Reach Minor is a world of trenches and attrition. For 3 months we have held this line against the Ork menace that consumed the eastern continents. 13 regiments have been reduced to 4. Supply lines are stretched to breaking. Reinforcements are not coming. We hold because the Emperor demands it, and because failure means death for every soul on this world. Marcus absorbed the information, slotting it into mental frameworks built from years of strategic briefings. The situation was familiar in its hopelessness. Overwhelming enemy, limited resources, no victory condition beyond survival. He'd lived this scenario on Serra during the final years of the Locust War. The details were different, but fundamentals remained constant. "You need soldiers," Marcus said. It wasn't a question. "We need men who can kill orcs and not break when they charge," Colt replied. "I have watched you fight. You do not hesitate. You do not panic. You understand violence at a level most guardsmen take years to learn if they survive long enough to learn at all. You will be integrated into the 43rd Hell's Reach Infantry. You will follow orders. You will fight until I tell you to stop. In return, you will have purpose, supplies, and the Emperor's grace." Marcus considered the offer for exactly 3 seconds. He had no other options. "What about my equipment?" Marcus asked. "My weapon uses ammunition you don't manufacture. My armor needs maintenance protocols you don't have." Colt gestured to a figure standing in shadows near the far wall, a hunched shape wrapped in red robes that rustled like insect wings. The figure shuffled forward into light, revealing itself as something between human and machine. Its face was hidden behind a brass mask lined with optical sensors that whirred and clicked. Mechadendrites coiled from its back like mechanical serpents, each tipped with tools whose purpose Marcus could only guess. When it spoke, its voice was synthesized, monotone, laced with static. "Enginseer Val 9 will examine your war gear," Colt said. "The Adeptus Mechanicus maintains all weapons and armor on this world. If your equipment can be sustained, it will be. If not, you will be issued standard guard armaments. Either way, you will be ready for combat within 6 hours." The Enginseer moved closer, mechadendrites reaching toward Marcus's armor with disturbing eagerness. Marcus fought the instinct to step back, forcing himself to remain still as the tech priest tools traced contours of his breastplate, probing seams and analyzing composition with sensors that hummed and clicked. "Primitive but functional," Val 9 droned. "Alloy composition suggests pre-Imperial metallurgy. Power systems inadequate for sustained operation but sufficient for tactical deployment. Weapon design inefficient but effective. Ammunition synthesis possible with modification to promethium distillation processes. Spirit of the weapon is dormant but not hostile. We may reach accord." Marcus had no idea what that meant, but the Enginseer seemed satisfied. Colt nodded once, dismissing the tech priest and refocusing on Marcus. "You will report to Sergeant Toven in Trench Sigma 7. He commands a veteran squad that has held its section for 48 days without relief. They have lost 9 men in that time. You will be the 10th replacement. Do not disappoint them. Do not disappoint me. And above all, do not disappoint the Emperor." Marcus was escorted through a maze of tunnels connecting the command post to forward trenches. Walls were lined with pipes that hissed and leaked, with cables that sparked intermittently, with niches holding shrines to the Emperor, flickering candles illuminating crude artwork of a figure seated on a golden throne. The guardsmen genuflected as they passed each shrine, lips moving in silent prayer. Marcus said nothing, processing everything he saw, cataloging details that might keep him alive. The tunnels eventually opened into Trench Sigma 7, a fortified position stretching 300 meters along the northern defensive line. It was deeper than previous trenches, walls reinforced with ferrocrete slabs and buttressed with steel beams. Firing steps ran along both sides. Sandbags stacked 3 high for cover. Heavy weapon emplacements dotted the line at regular intervals, autocannons, and heavy bolters manned by crews that never seemed to rest. Sergeant Toven was a blocky man with a face like weathered granite and eyes holding the kind of exhaustion sleep couldn't cure. His uniform was patched in a dozen places, flak armor scored by near misses. When he saw Marcus approaching, he looked him up and down with critical assessment of a man judging a tool's utility. "So you're the one," Toven said, his voice gravelly. "The stranger who fell from the sky and killed orcs like he'd been doing it all his life. Commissar says, you're guard now. I say we'll see how long you last." Marcus unslung his lancer, checking the chamber out of habit. "I've lasted through worse." Toven grunted the sound, carrying grudging approval. "You'll fit in, or you'll die. Those are the options. My squad holds this section. We watch the wire, we kill greenskins. We pray the line doesn't break before reinforcements arrive, which they won't. So mostly we just kill greenskins." He gestured to men scattered along the trench, exhausted figures in mud-caked uniforms who barely looked up from their posts. "That's Rael on the heavy bolter. Corvus and Masson have the autocannon. Jeth and Prime are riflemen. Good shots when they're not shaking. Vask is our Vox operator. Heron is our medic, which means he keeps us alive long enough to die properly." Each name came with a nod or raised hand, brief acknowledgments from men too tired to care about formalities. Marcus found a spot on the firing step and settled in, Lancer resting across his knees. The view beyond the trench was a wasteland of craters and corpses, barbed wire and burning wreckage. Smoke drifted across the landscape in slow coils, obscuring everything beyond 200 meters. This was hell, not metaphorically. This was hell made manifest, a place where violence had become geography and death was the only constant. Marcus had been here before, in different forms, on different worlds. He didn't have to wait long. The assault began at dusk, though on Hell's Reach Minor, dusk was merely deepening of ambient gloom that passed for daylight. First warning came from the wire, the sound of metal twisting and snapping as something massive forced its way through barriers. Vask called it in over Vox, his voice steady despite tremor in his hands. Tovin bellowed orders, and the squad moved with practiced efficiency, each man taking position and preparing to kill. Marcus rose to the firing step, bringing his lancer to shoulder and peering through the scope. The optics struggled with smoke and darkness, but movement was unmistakable. Shapes emerged from haze, dozens advancing in loose mobs suggesting coordination without discipline. Orks. Again. Always orks. They came in waves that never seemed to diminish, as though the planet itself spawned them from mud. "Range 300 meters and closing," Corvus called from the autocannon emplacement. "Permission to engage. Wait for it," Tovin growled. "Let them get close. Make every shot count." Marcus watched the horde advance, tracking individual orks through his scope. He identified leaders' larger specimens that bellowed orders and waved crude banners. He noted weapons they carried. Massive guns that looked more dangerous to wielders than targets, and blades that were simply sheets of sharpened metal bolted to handles. These weren't soldiers. They were force of nature wearing trappings of warfare. Chaos given form and purpose. At 200 meters, Tovin gave the order. "Open fire." The trench erupted in coordinated violence. Lost fire lit up smoke, hundreds of crimson beams lancing into advancing orks. The autocannon thundered, shells punching through green flesh and detonating inside bodies, turning orks into explosions of meat and bone. The heavy bolter roared, spitting mass reactive rounds that tore limbs from torsos and heads from necks. Marcus added his lancer to the chorus, firing in controlled bursts that dropped orks with mechanical precision. The horde staggered, but didn't break. Orks fell by the dozen bodies piling in the killing field, but those behind simply climbed over corpses and kept coming. Some fired back, weapons spraying bullets in wild arcs that sparked off ferrocrete and kicked up geysers of mud. A few shots found flesh. Guardsmen screamed as they were hit, falling back from the firing line as medical personnel dragged them to safety. Marcus shifted fire to larger orks, the ones wearing more armor and carrying heavier weapons. These were threats that could break the line if left unchecked. He burned through a magazine in seconds, dropped it, slapped a fresh one home without taking his eyes off the scope. The lancer never overheated, never jammed. Marcus thanked every engineer who designed it to function in worst possible conditions. An explosion rocked the trench as an ork grenade detonated against the parapet, spraying shrapnel that pinged off Marcus's armor. He felt impacts like distant hammers warnings from his HUD about superficial damage that could be ignored. He kept firing, adjusting aim as orks closed to 100 meters, then 75, then 50. They were inside minimum effective range for most weapons, and panic began rippling through the guardsmen. Tovin saw it and responded with the only tool that mattered: fix bayonets. The order was archaic, suicidal, exactly what was needed. Guardsmen drew combat knives and affixed them to lasguns, transforming ranged weapons into makeshift spears. Tovin drew his chainsword, its blade roaring to life with a sound that cut through chaos. He stood at the center of the line, visible to every man in the trench, and raised the weapon high. "For the Emperor!" he roared. "Hold the line! The Orks crashed into the trench. What followed wasn't combat but butchery, desperate melee where every second was measured in blood and screaming. Orks vaulted the parapet, massive forms crashing down among guardsmen like living avalanches. They swung crude weapons with bone-crushing force, each blow capable of caving skulls or shattering ribs. The guardsmen fought back with bayonets and knives, stabbing at green flesh that seemed to shrug off wounds that would kill humans instantly. Marcus dropped his lancer and drew his combat knife, a blade designed for close-quarters work against enemies wearing chitin armor and standing 7 feet tall. He drove it into the throat of an orc looming over him, twisted, ripped, sideways. Hot blood sprayed across his visor. He shoved the dying creature backward into its companions, retrieved his lancer, activated the chainsaw bayonet, and waded into the press. The blade screamed through flesh and bone, teeth chewing through orc anatomy with relentless efficiency. Marcus moved with brutal economy, each motion designed to kill or maim, each step calculated to keep from being surrounded. He'd fought in close quarters before, in the warrens beneath Sarah's cities where the Locust had turned every corridor into kill zone. This was no different. Smaller spaces, higher stakes, same fundamental rules. Kill them before they kill you. An orc swung a massive cleaver at Marcus's head, the blade whistling through air with enough force to decapitate. Marcus ducked under the swing, drove his shoulder into the orc's midsection, brought the chainsaw blade up through its jaw. The orc's roar turned into wet gurgle. It collapsed, thrashing. Marcus kicked it aside and kept moving, his armor's servos straining as he grappled with enemies that outweighed him by hundreds of pounds. To his left, Tovin fought like a man possessed, his chainsword cutting through orcs with practiced brutality. To his right, Jeth and Prime worked in tandem, one stabbing, while the other provided cover fire at point-blank range. The trench was chaos incarnate, swirling melee where friend and foe were distinguished only by color of their blood. Then, as suddenly as it began, the assault broke. The surviving orcs fell back not in rout, but in recognition this position was too costly to take. They retreated into smoke, dragging their wounded and bellowing challenges that promised future violence. The guardsmen let them go, too exhausted to pursue, too focused on survival to care about anything beyond the immediate. Marcus leaned against the trench wall, breath coming in ragged gasps. His armor's rebreather struggled to regulate. His lancer dripped with orc blood, chainsaw blades still spinning down from maximum revolutions. Around him, the trench was devastation. Bodies littered the ground, human and orc alike, their blood mixing into mud until it became crimson slurry. The wounded screamed for medics, the dying whispered prayers. The survivors simply stared at nothing, their minds processing horrors that would haunt them forever. Tovin moved through the carnage, checking on his men, offering words of encouragement or comfort depending on what was needed. When he reached Marcus, he stopped and studied the man for a long moment. "You saved lives today," Tovin said quietly. "Kept the line from breaking when it should have. I don't know what war you fought before this one, but you've earned your place here." Marcus said nothing, too tired to form words that mattered. Tovin clapped him on the shoulder, a gesture of camaraderie transcending language or culture. "Get some rest. We'll be at it again in a few hours. They always come back. The orcs always come back." 3 days passed in a blur of combat and exhaustion. Marcus learned the rhythms of trench warfare on Hell's Reach Minor, the patterns governing when orcs attacked and when they regrouped, the shifts in artillery fire signaling incoming barrages or enemy advances. He learned names of guardsmen in Tovin's squad, memorizing faces and voices, and small details that made them human rather than statistics waiting to happen. He learned to eat rations that tasted like compressed cardboard and chemicals, to drink recaf that kept sleep at bay, to sleep in 5-minute increments when opportunity presented itself. He learned that the Imperium of Man was an empire so vast that individual planets were mere footnotes in history spanning millennia, that the emperor they worshipped was a corpse seated on a throne of gold, sustained by psychic sacrifice and bureaucratic inertia, a god figure whose will was interpreted by priests and enforced by commissars. That humanity in this age had regressed to technological stagnation and religious fervor, where innovation was heresy and faith was the only currency that mattered. He learned that Hell's Reach Minor was dying and everyone knew it. The orc invasion had gained momentum despite every defensive success. For every trench held, 2 more were overrun. For every greenskin killed, 3 more emerged from fungal spores permeating the planet's soil. The Guard was fighting a war of attrition it couldn't win, bleeding slowly while the enemy grew stronger. Reinforcements weren't coming. Evacuation wasn't an option. The only choice was to fight until the end and then fight some more, because dying well mattered more than dying at all. It was madness. It was Sarah all over again, the final days of the Locust War writ large across an entire planet. Marcus found grim comfort in the familiarity. On the fourth day, the orders changed. Tovin gathered the squad in a section of trench, offering relative privacy, away from heavy weapon emplacements and Vox stations. His expression was grave, posture tense, in a way suggesting the news was worse than usual. The men sensed it immediately, their exhaustion giving way to weary attention. "Command wants us to conduct reconnaissance in force," Tovin said without preamble. "Intelligence reports suggest the Orks are building something in Sector Gamma 9, something big. We're going out there to see what it is and report back. If possible, we sabotage it. If not, we gather data and get out." Masson cursed under his breath. "That's a death sentence, Sarge. Gamma 9 is 5 kilometers into enemy territory. We'll be surrounded before we make it halfway." Tovin didn't argue the point, because it was objectively true. Commissar Colt chose us because we're expendable and experienced. We go in at dusk, use the smoke for cover, move fast. Fenix, you're on point. Your armor gives you the best chance of surviving first contact. Rael and Corvus, your fire support. Jeth, Prime, Vask, you're with me. Heron stays here. We can't risk losing our medic on a suicide run. Marcus met Tovin's eyes and saw the apology there, unspoken but genuine. The sergeant hadn't asked for this mission any more than the rest of them, but orders were orders. In the Imperial Guard, refusing orders meant execution by bolt pistol. Colt had made that abundantly clear. "When do we move?" Marcus asked. 2 hours. Get your gear ready. Say your prayers if you have any. Try not to think about the odds because they're shit. The squad dispersed, each man preparing in his own way. Marcus checked his Lancer, confirmed ammunition count, inspected armor for damage that might compromise integrity. Ingenseer Val 9 had done impressive work over the past days, synthesizing rounds that fit Marcus's weapon and patching breaches in his armor, with materials the tech priest claimed were blessed by the Omnissiah. Marcus didn't understand the theology, but the repairs held, and that was all that mattered. Vask approached as Marcus finished his checks. The Vox operator's youthful face lined with worry he tried to hide behind bravado. "Is it true you come from another world? Not another planet in the Imperium, but something else entirely?" Marcus considered the question, weighing the value of honesty against danger of revealing too much. "Something like that. What was it like?" "Your world dying." Marcus paused. "Just like this one." Vask absorbed that, nodded slowly, and walked away without another word. 2 hours later, the squad assembled at a sally port, a reinforced gate set into the trench wall opening onto no man's land. Tovin conducted final equipment check, ensuring every man carried extra ammunition, demo charges, signal flares. Marcus noticed each guardsman also carried a small prayer scroll tucked into their helmet liner, a final benediction in case they didn't return. Tovin keyed the Vox, speaking quietly to whoever monitored their frequency. "Sigma 7 Patrol, ready to deploy. Emperor, watch over us." The response was crackling static that might have been acknowledgement or atmospheric interference. The sally port opened with grinding gears, revealing the wasteland beyond. Smoke drifted across the landscape in lazy coils thick enough to obscure vision beyond 30 meters. In the distance, something roared. A sound, vibrating through the earth like the heartbeat of a dying god. Marcus took point. Lancer raised and ready. Armor sensors painting ghostly shapes through smoke. The squad followed in single file, maintaining 5-meter intervals to minimize casualties from explosions or ambush. They moved into no man's land, into enemy territory, into hell. And Marcus Fenix, soldier of a dead civilization, became one more body standing between humanity and extinction.